Then the second time they come back, not the same ones came back because they were killed. And that happened 3 times. So every time I was able to notice how many soldiers were killed from that group.
Tell me about the airplanes that start going over your house.
The airplanes always fired at where I was living. And the reason is that the Germans, in retreat, they were pursued by the American airplanes. And so every time that they stopped, the American planes would appear and shoot at them. They did 2 things. Either they machine gunned them or they bombed them. So we received both, as well as artillery, but that's a different story. So I was there all the time. And one morning, all the Germans were in front of the house, tanks and trucks. My mother came to me and said, Adolfo, says, I'm going into the backyard onto the elm tree to get the leaves for the rabbits. And she had a burlap sack. I said, well, no problem, Mama. I'll be here. 5 minutes later, all of a sudden, these planes come right at us, right at me. I was sitting down there. And as I saw them, I said, oh my God, my mother is in the backyard on a tree. So without any thought, I rushed to her and tell her to come down right away. She came down and ran towards the house. And this plane followed us, machine gunned us, and I still remember the bullets at our heels. And as we entered the door, the door frame shattered into pieces.
There was also a very strategic bridge there that was blown up.
The bridge was a bridge that proved to me that the German soldiers weren't as heroic as I thought they were. I was told that they were great soldiers and brave and everything else.
But this is in retrospect.
No, at the time, that's what I thought. So I'm speaking firsthand as it happened. So we were being bombed, and there were planes of all kinds that were bombing all along the road. And there was a battery, anti-aircraft battery, 4 guns, 4 barrels, manned by these German soldiers. And they were on a bridge right next to my property. And so I decided to take a look. I wanted to see if they were brave. In other words, if they were going to fire. And then I also said, and what if they fire and they get fired back? What's going to happen to me? But I decided that if they were going to fire, I would run under the bridge. Okay. Luckily, it didn't happen. It didn't happen because these soldiers, every time there was a plane, they aimed at them, and they were ready to shoot and never shot, about 4 times.
And they never...
And they never fired. And they had the right to fire because the people were being bombed. And so I concluded that they were not heroes at all.
But they did, the airplanes did knock down the
airplane. Oh, this was so tragic, and I feel bad to have to tell it. One of the bombs in my next village, where my aunt lived, the bomb entered the roof of the house and went down into the cantina, into the cellar. And there it exploded. The people were inside. The house was burst out. When I got there to see what happened, body parts all over the place. Just the most tragic thing. And I don't even know how many people were killed. But that's what war was about. And those are the things that I saw. Not one German soldier was killed. All civilians were killed. All along.
Yeah, of course. Tell me about the Taskegee Airmen. What is that?
The Taskegee Airmen.
Taskegee.
Taskegee Airmen. Oh, I didn't know who they were, by the way. I have to tell you something else before I tell you about the Taskegee Airmen. That I had never seen a black person in my life. Nor did I know that there were yellow people, yellow-skinned people. I didn't.
Of course, you live in a farm, very limited.
I didn't know anything.
The world is very limited at that time,
Absolutely.
At 10 years of age.
So all of a sudden, this plane starts coming to me, and shoots at me. That's when my mother was on the elm tree.
Uh-huh.
But I didn't know who that plane was or who the pilots were until 1980. Oh my God. We're going from 1944 now to 1980. So in 1980, I bought out Branden Books, Branden Publishing.
Your publishing book.
Yeah. And I looked at the inventory of the books that had been published by Edmund Brown. And here's the book, The Taskegee Airmen. It was the first book that was published on the Taskegee Airmen, and it's the book that is established the name Taskegee Airmen. Before that, they were known as the Taskegee pilots, black pilots.
Oh, Taskegee means black?
No, Taskegee is an Indian name that describes the place where they were trained.
I see.
Okay, but I have to say this, that I looked at this book and I start reading it, and all of a sudden I said, oh my God, these were the ones that fired at me during the war.
Yeah.
And I read the whole thing and I said, oh my, what a story
They
they
describe
had.
the same area that you
Oh,
came from.
yeah. And I became a major author on the history of the Tuskegee Airmen because of that.
So you read this book and then you start studying and
I
preparing.
talked with the author, I republished the book, he added another editions. Finally, after he died, I added about 400 pages, and now the book is the biggest ever. So I'm the co-author of the famous book, Tuskegee Airmen.
Of soldiers who almost killed you. Okay. There is another instance, or actually, let me another instance first, and
Okay.
then we talk to the bias. Tell us a little about the story of the Moroccan soldiers who came to your relative's
Yes.
house.
Yes, some of them were not very nice, but the ones that I talked with and became friends with were very nice. Yes, there was raping that took place, drunkenness that took place, loud noises, all kinds of things. We were lucky to have made it, morally and ethically. We were lucky. Not all of them did. Many of the women were really quite raped, and I always wondered, why is it that my mother and my sister, Nina, who was a young woman, a beautiful, why wasn't she there in my house during those battles? And then I realized that my mother had sent her away to the farm with Zio Michele, so that she was not exposed to all the things that were going on. So we lucked out because of the wisdom on the part of my mother. But not the other ones did.
There's a neighbor of yours, Concetina, and her daughter.
Yeah.
What happened to that daughter?
Well, they were about to be raped, and I happened to be there and saw this going on, and I rushed out and got this friend of mine who was a big bully, and came over there with a knife, showed a knife, and the guys ran away.
Really?
Yeah.
Was not a police, military police?
No, he was a man, as best as I remember,
So
a bully.
So you saved, in a way.
I'd like to think that. But otherwise, what would have happened? They would have been raped because others were.
Yeah. But on the book, obviously, you talk about people, as I said before, morality is very much involved in this book.
Yes.
Some people are evil, some people are
Right.
good. And of course, Anna is one who is a good girl.
My sister.
Then there is Clara, or Chiara.
Well, Chiara was, see how fate sometimes, destiny is so strange. She was my brother-in-law's sister. And she had a girl, her name I believe was Rosetta. So I don't know what happened to her mentally, but all of a sudden there was need for these women to go back and forth from Naples to Foggia and all to pick up grain so they could sell to the people who were hungry. So in a way she became a prostitute. So now what happens? The war is over. Her husband
Comes back.
had gone to the Russian front, comes back and doesn't find his wife at home, but finds his little girl at home, and then learns that she was a prostitute.
Here there's a distinction, which to me it's a little strange, but the book makes a distinction. A woman who gives of herself due to needs or the reality of the difficulty time is one thing. But for a woman to give of herself freely and for pleasure seeking or whatever, then it's different.
Very good point.
But yeah, I guess it's good.
It's a very good point, except that she did not give, she gave herself. She didn't have to.
Didn't she know that probably her husband was dead?
She thought the husband was dead. See, nobody was coming back from the Russian front. So she assumed that her husband was dead. I know that because I remember that discussion. So she did assume that. But when this guy came back, oh my God, I still remember him. And then one night, because she had run away, and he went over, found her, and killed her. And
is this a passion crime? How would you?
It was not a crime of passion because he did it deliberately, knowing. So it's not that they all of a sudden boom and he. No, it was all.
And the relative and the community seemed to sort of either accept that or knew that that was a consequence of doing something wrong like that.
It was more or less of giving it back to her. In other words, they didn't approve of her, but they didn't want her dead. But nevertheless, they opted with the husband. And the husband, I think, went to jail for a little bit, and then he was released, and he continued to be a good father of that girl, and he was actually an asset to the community.
Now, we talked about the morality of the story here, the good, the moral people, and the immoral people, and then there's the redeemed people.
Yes.
Let's say Alberto.
Alberto was my brother-in-law.
Your brother-in-law was?
Well, he's dead. They're all dead now.
They're all dead.
And my brother-in-law.
How did he behave during the war? And then he changed. He redeemed himself.
Yeah, he was during the war. He was also part of the Camorra. You try to buy contraband, all of those things. It was necessary because otherwise, so many people wouldn't have survived. So they did something bad, but it was good because they provided food for certain people. They did it obviously at a profit. Okay, but why not? But the end result, as far as I'm concerned, was good. But Alberto became a wonderful person.
Thereafter. So he redeemed himself.
Yes.
Okay. I think at this point, we don't have much more time. Would you like to read something from the
book?
Why don't we read about something that is, well, nothing to do with the war, but still with work is not enough. For men, work is not enough. Page 146. I thought that is a lesson, which is amazing that a young man of 21
I know.
talks about this. So
here the situation is that my brother Chris had come to Italy, and he went, and I went with him to my grandfather, not Crescenzo, but Gabriele. Okay. And they were talking about war and soldiers.
And he said he was going to get married, and he was going to work.
Yeah. So here it is. So my grandfather answers and says, "No, Chris, not work alone. You see, I agree with you. Work develops a child physically and somewhat mentally. Let's say that work and exercise develop a man physically. Just this development alone is not enough." And here's the important part. A person, in order to be a man, must read, must understand poets, theologians, and philosophers. He must live with the immortal spirit of these men. Otherwise, being immortal as he is, as man is, man will only live one life and as soon as his body ceases to exist, the life also ends. Instead, the philosopher and the poet may die, but their ideas and interpretations will live on. And if we see this light and acquire it, then we too will become immortal, in the sense that we'll be living as ideals, not as substance.
I think that's quite profound.
It really is.
Because once you create an idea, the idea doesn't die.
But a body dies in the sense that it becomes transformed. But that ideal stays, and it goes on to others.
There is a Renaissance saying, how beautiful it is that after death we still live. With the publishing of books. That refers to the publishing.
The thing about that is the most wonderful thing during the Renaissance. They were humanists, and the humanists believe that the soul of a man is the most important.
Okay, now we are almost coming to an end.
Okay.
So I would like you to go 184, 85, about the child crying so deeply because he thinks he's going to die, and so he really cries and cries. And yet there's a beautiful description there. You compare the eyelids of the boy to blades of grass.
So
it's poetic.
I really think that I had died. And as a matter of fact, I did pass out. There's no doubt. And I used to get sick to my stomach. It was just amazing. And I don't know why I have lived and survived all of these years.
It was a bad illness.
It was. So let me... So my mother says, don't cry so much, Adolfo, please don't. You are brave. Brave people don't cry. And then his head was against the pillow, all wet. The grandmother covered his shoulders, and with a white sheet and left. Adolfo slowly began to close his eyes. His eyelashes were as heavy as blades of grass in the morning dew, which glistened while evaporating under the rising sun. His eyelids were heavy. He closed them a few times and then opened them slowly, wearily. Then he closed them again,